Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here. Another episode of Living the Wildlife podcast as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. So hey, we're so glad you're coming along and you're listening today. So we're really happy to have you, and do take the time to subscribe to our channel. Give us some feedback, as my colleague says, engage. Link up with us on Facebook, and of course, don't forget to sign up on our YouTube channel. We'd love to have your support, and definitely give us some feedback in terms of what you'd like to have in the future. So, hey, I've had a little bit of surgery, but I'm out of that now, and so I got some more surgery coming up next, and hopefully it's not going to be too serious. But anyways, life happens, life moves on. It's, as my mother says, it's tough getting old, and yes, it is. So just keep that as a reminder, everyone. It's getting old, so definitely take care of your body because you only have one. So today's topic that I wanted to talk about is watch your language. No, I'm not referring to swearing and using bad language, although you should, as a professional, definitely be careful about how often you're dropping swears, particularly in front of clients and in front of your own workers. That can really be a problem. But no, I'm talking about we need to watch the language that we use as part of being a professional. This is one of my long-standing just pet peeves with the industry. I've been yelling at trappers for a couple of decades now, and I'm now doing the same thing for wildlife control operators. It literally drives me nuts when I'm looking on Facebook and I see people, what kind of live trap should I be using? I use a live trap. And I'm thinking, why are you using footholds to catch a squirrel? See what I said? See what I did there? I pointed out the issue of when you use fuzzy language, you can get bad results. And so I'm going to talk about that today. So I hope I've got your attention, because one of the challenges we have in our industry is that people don't take it seriously. And one of the reasons why people don't take it seriously is because we don't take it seriously. We don't take the time to watch our language and to use professional terms. Why is this important? Why do you need to use professional terms? Because if you want to be treated like a professional, you need to act like a professional. Let me illustrate. So let's say you go to your doctor. You got something wrong, or maybe you're just going for an annual visit or something, and the doctor says, yeah, I'm doing a little investigation of you, and you got this little thingamabob up on your arm here. How long have you had that thingamabob? What would your reaction be? If your doctor went up to you and said, yeah, you have this thingamabob on here, and we need to get this analyzed and figure out what this thingamabob is, would you be continuing to go to that doctor, or would you be thinking, what kind of a Cracker Jack box did he get his degree from? Now, obviously, I'm being very sarcastic here to drive a point home. I don't think live trap is on the same level as thingamabob. But I want you to get the point why this is important. We need to use proper language so that we can start educating each other and educating our clients. And so if you don't like the word educate, we need to convince them. We need to lobby them. We need to help them understand that the language that we've been using is simply not adequate. So the first reason you need to be watching your language is for being a professional. Professionals use technical terms as part of the communication practices within their industry, because when you use technical terms, the semantic range, which just means the meaning of the word, is very precise. That's why scientists use scientific language, not because they want to show off all the big words that they know. They use scientific language so that when they're communicating with another scientist, they're both talking the same thing. That's why we have scientific names for animals. As the genus and then the species. Musculus, that's the scientific name for mice. Castor canadensis, that's the scientific name for beaver. So this way, when people use the popular word beaver, you don't know exactly, depending on the context, are they referring to the animal, or are they referring to a rather stereotypical word that sometimes people with slang use for women? When you say Castor canadensis, there's only one meaning with it. There's just one. It's that rodent that swims in water and cuts down trees. That's what technical language does. Professionals use technical language. And people say, oh, I don't want to get all high and falutin. It's not about being high and falutin. There are times when terms can get so technical and arcane that can be the case. We're talking about just some fundamental terms in our industry that we have got to start using. So the first reason is being a professional. Second reason is so that we communicate accurately and carefully. The third reason why we should be using professional terms is because we don't want to give more ammunition to the animal rights protest industry than what we're already doing. It's amazing to me how many trappers, and by that I mean the fur trappers, how many wildlife control operators, and even PCOs, who should know better, use language that actually supports animal rights claims. Let me illustrate. So when you use the term live trap, what do you mean by that? You're saying, well, I'm talking about a trap that catches the animal alive. Okay, not very accurate, actually, because footholds capture the animal alive. So what you mean, it's actually an envelopment trap. It's a trap that captures the animal like it's in a prison without grasping any part of its body. Now, what happens when you hold up a cage trap and you call it a live trap, and then you hold up a foothold? What's your client think that foothold is? So if this is a live trap, what's the foothold? Now, if you're thinking clearly here, you're going to think, well, this must be a death trap, because what's the opposite of a live trap? Is a death trap. So notice how you've already thrown footholds under the bus inappropriately. Now, I know some of you may be out there, well, I live in the big city. I will never, ever have to use a foothold. You hope. Because the foothold is just a symbol for other devices. I come from the state of Massachusetts. That's where I did my work in the wildlife removal service when I owned my company there back in the 90s. Not a very bright state, all things considered, right? So the people of Massachusetts aren't known for their intelligence. I know Harvard's there, but that's one of the reasons why it's not that intelligent. Okay, so why do I say that? Because we had a ballot initiative. This is not something done by the legislature. This is not something done by the governor. This is done by the citizens of Massachusetts who get enough signatures to put a ballot question on for it to be elected upon, to be voted on. And this, one of the things, had three major points. I'm not going to get into all of it, but this was in 1996 when this ballot initiative was going forward. It was going to be part of the regular election. And one of them was to so-called ban cruel traps. That was part of the marketing campaign. So that we were required to use cage and box traps. We were no longer going to be allowed to use footholds. By the way, footholds were already banned anyways, but they wanted it banned by statute, not just simply regulation. The law was so broadly written, or I should say the proposal was so broadly written, it banned traps that hadn't even been invented yet, because it talked about the mechanism and how the trap worked. If the trap grabbed any part of the animal's body, it was banned, except mouse traps and rat traps. Now, why do you think they excluded those traps? Because they didn't want the pest control industry getting all up into their business. And they knew that most people in Massachusetts still hate rats and mice. So they basically threw the fur trappers under the bus, and, by the way, us problem animal control agents, who used to use conibears. We were hoping to be able to get maybe the collarum trap down the road. The snares were illegal in Massachusetts, and the collarum was treated as a snare, even though it's not a snare, it's a cable restraint. But the bottom line was footholds were banned. Any trap that grabbed the animal by its body was automatically banned. Even our mole traps were eliminated. Why? Because when people see the word live trap for a cage, and they see any trap that looks differently than a box, it's considered a death trap. Now, you may think you're never going to need these other devices, but don't be so sure. There are a lot of traps that have been developed that are used for multiple animals. Conibear style traps that could be used for rats, but could be used for squirrels as well. But because of the way this law was written, it banned it all. So just because you don't think right now, because you're new to the industry, that you won't use such and such a trap, don't be so sure. As a professional, you should not be looking to ban equipment. You should be looking to expand your portfolio. It's like a car repair person who's just I got to get rid of this ratchet. This ratchet's terrible. Because wildlife control is complex, and there's always going to be, you may use a trap once in a year, but for that one instance, that trap's going to be helpful. But if it gets banned, you're not going to want it. So when we reinforce the notion that a foothold is a kill trap because of our language with live trap, we reinforce the prejudices in our clients. And for some people in the industry, we reinforce their own prejudice because they're too ignorant to understand the importance and value of footholds and conibears. Now, I'm really being harsh today. I'm kind of wired up. I'm feeling it today. Get a little angry. Because this is something that our industry needs to grow up. And the fact of the matter is that we've been pussyfooting around way too long. And let me tell you something. I've been sounding this call for years. The animal rights protest industry is coming for you, whether you think it or not. Sooner or later, they're coming for you. And we have got to be prepared. One of the ways we can do this is watch our language. But why is this important? Because the person who controls the language controls the debate. Now, let me unpack that for you. And I'm going to use a very controversial issue here. I'm not going down. I'm just using this as an illustration. When we talk about the issue of abortion, those of you who are old enough like me will remember the time when the media used to use the word abortion rights and pro-life, or pro-choice and pro-life. The abortion lobby recognized, how are they going to win that argument? If this side calls themselves pro-life, well, what's the opposite of pro-life? Pro-death. Well, they didn't like that label. So what they told the media is that the media needed to stop calling the pro-life movement by the term that they wanted to be identified with. And they said, no, they're just anti-abortion activists. And you listen to the media. This isn't whether you agree on abortion or disagree on abortion. I just want you to understand how language frames the debate. Pro-life, pro-choice. So the pro-choice activists convinced the media to no longer use the word pro-life. And I guarantee you, if you can do a little internet search, it'll be very hard for you to find the term pro-life in the New York Times, the Washington Post, any of the major newspapers, any of the news outlets will not use the term pro-life. On rare occasions they will. Why? Because the pro-choice movement convinced the media that they said this was a prejudicial term. So now you don't hear the word pro-life from the media anymore. We have to do that with our trapping. Because when you use the word live trap, you reinforce the idea that all other traps than these boxes and cages kill. And that is not true. So you're not only reinforcing a lie, which is not very professional, you're actually hurting the future of your business, because you're going to find yourself in a situation where there's going to be a political controversy and people are going to say, well, why weren't you using live trap? Or we're going to let you use live traps. We're not going to let you use anything else. And you're going to wonder, how did the culture pass me by? There's so few of us in our industry. We are such a small minority. We have to take advantage of everything available to us now. And that means watching our language. So it's no longer a live trap. You need to be calling it a cage trap or a box trap. Cage traps have wire walls. Box traps have solid walls. Because actually, a foothold is a live trap. A cable restraint is a live trap. But when you force people to start using the word cage trap, and the other thing is, cage traps aren't even always live traps, right? I had a job where I went to, was looking into the attic, and I found a cage there, and there was a dead squirrel in it, and it was dead there for a while. You know what the owner told me? Oh yeah, we had the trap up there and then went on vacation. Is that a live trap or is that a death trap? So this is something that we have to be looking at here. We have to be careful of our language, and so we need to be teaching our clients. You don't have to necessarily correct your client. No, don't use that word. You just simply say, when they say, are you going to use live traps? You respond back, I'm going to use cage traps. That gives you an opportunity to tell them why you call it a cage trap or why they call it a box trap. They probably won't even ask. So that's the first one. Second one I've already touched on here, and that is it a snare or is it a cable restraint? A snare has some sort of a wire loop, and it's designed to kill the animal. A cable restraint is like a choke chain that relaxes when the dog stops pulling. So it's completely up to the animal. If it wants to keep fighting, it's going to get tighter. When it wants to relax, it's going to loose. Snare, cable restraint. Why do you think we need to do that? Because a lot of wildlife biologists still think that everything that has a loop is a snare. The collarum trap. I don't make any money on the collarum trap. I wish I did. Okay, and that's not the only one. There are other devices out there. You can use, a lot of times the difference between a snare and a cable restraint comes down to the lock and where you're setting it. Does the animal have a place to tie up and choke down? The point is that if we don't educate our biologists, we're going to have foolish regulations. Let me give an illustration. I was in Massachusetts back in the day. I had to tell a PhD biologist. I said, "Didn't you know that we can have cable that snares don't always kill?" I didn't know the word cable restraint back then. And he's like, "Really? PhD?" He's not an idiot, but he didn't know. So notice how by explaining the difference for him, he didn't even know that was available. Now, he had no authority to change the regulation. It wasn't up to him. The point is that he didn't even know it was an option. A lot of times the public and even biologists, sadly to say, have misunderstandings about what we're doing in the wildlife industry. They don't know. It's not being taught in school. It's not being taught in colleges and universities. All the colleges and universities are teaching is about biologists being out in the middle of the wilderness somewhere. They don't really know what goes on in urban wildlife control. Probably your game warden doesn't even know what you do. So we need to use our terms correctly. This means on your blogs, on your websites, in your communication, in your literature, and your conversations with your clients. And certainly on Facebook, because it's ridiculous. How often I see the phrase live trap. What bait should I put in my live trap? It's beneath us. And you need to take this seriously, because one of the problems that I have in this industry is a lot of guys, sorry ladies, it's a male-dominated field, but a lot of people in this industry aren't looking at the long term. They're not thinking, where are you going to be when you're 50? Where are you going to be when you're 60? You're still going to be climbing a ladder? What's the future of your industry? Unfortunately, we have a lot of people in our industry who all they're thinking about is the next job. And we have got to start organizing and getting into a place, and part of this organizing is learning how to use proper language. All right, so we talked about live trap versus cage trap and box trap. Talked about the differences between cable restraint and snare. There's more. Are you calling them babies? This is something that Charles Holt turned me on to, and I think he's right. So this is where I was wrong. Yeah, I know. Some of you don't believe I ever say that. Do not anthropomorphize your wildlife. What does that mean? It means treating them like humans. We have a growing culture today who think that it's not just a raccoon, it's Rocky the raccoon. And that you can somehow talk to these animals. They're not young, they're babies. No, humans are babies. Wildlife is wildlife. One of the things you'll never hear me do, you'll never hear me call a person an animal. Okay, I don't believe humans are animals. I believe we are, and I don't even like the word Homo sapien, although that's what people say, because I believe that there's something fundamentally different about being a person than being an animal. Okay, and it's more than just genetics. But when we're talking about young, we do not want to anthropomorphize them. So you want to say things like pups, cubs, young, not babies. So I removed 5 raccoon pups or 5 raccoon young. I removed the adult. You start using words like mommy. I removed the female. Why do we do that? Because when we don't want clients always looking at these animals, because things are going to happen. Let me give a story. I was in a job. This was during the rabies epidemic back in the East Coast, and I was hired by a city to remove a raccoon was not acting appropriately, so I had to go out and try to get it. Well, the raccoon wasn't sick enough. Climbed up onto a second floor porch. And I'm right across the yard from an elementary school that I had about maybe, it's been a while, 30 minutes before school let out. Now, what do you think was going to happen if I had a raccoon, or if kids saw that raccoon that I was trying to capture, I was trying to snare pole? What do you think was going to happen? Well, what happened is I was having trouble getting it, and I was running out of time. So I had to make a judgment call. I couldn't snare pole him. I gave it a college try. Couldn't do it. So I pushed him off the ledge. He hit the pavement, went down, scooped him up, put him in a cage, got out of there. Well, lo and behold, a teacher was watching out the window. And she reported me. Now, what do you think would have happened? I lost the I lost any more work with that city. Was that fair? No, it wasn't fair, because the city didn't even give me an opportunity to give my side of the story. Why is this? Because we have a growing culture who thinks that animals are actually more valuable than people. Look at people with their dogs. You would think that they love their dog more than they love their own children. And for some people, they do. We are losing our place of the hierarchy of being in our country, where people are treating animals like people. That will not bode well for our industry. Now, I know some of you are out there, oh, I'm no kill. I let everything go. Well, you shouldn't be letting everything go, because if you're dealing with a sick animal, you shouldn't be letting it go. And there's consequences for translocation and relocation. The fact is, there are going to be situations where you are going to need to euthanize or humanely dispatch. See how I'm using some technical terms? Do you know what those terms mean? Do you know the difference between translocation and relocation? That's another word that we use wrongly a lot. Translocation is when you're moving the animal outside of its home range. That's when you throw it in the back of the truck and you drive 20 miles and dump it. That's translocation. No raccoon has a home range of 20 miles. So now when you dump that animal in 20 miles, he has to find new food sources, shelter, while avoiding predators and figuring out what the heck just happened to him. That humane? How about relocation? Relocation is moving the animal within its home range. So you have a squirrel in a basement because it came down through the chimney, and you let it go in the backyard. You have relocated the squirrel. Squirrel knows the area because you moved him probably 10 feet. Now, obviously, a squirrel's home range is larger than 10 feet. Relocation versus translocation. How about euthanasia versus humane dispatch? Now, why do I say this? Because euthanasia is a very technical term. If you say you euthanize your animals and you're running them through a conibear to kill them, well, that's not euthanasia. Euthanasia is where the animal is unconscious when it dies. Conibears don't do that. Carbon dioxide does that. Carbon monoxide will do that. Be careful with carbon monoxide. A bullet properly placed to the brain will do that. You say, well, how is it unconscious? Because it loses its ability to think before it can feel the pain. Euthanasia has a very technical definition. What's humane dispatch? Well, humane dispatch is killing the animal quickly, but not necessarily while it's unconscious. Drowning, for example, I believe, is humane dispatch. It's not euthanasia because the animal's conscious while it's dying. But it can be quick. You say, I'll never drown anything. Really? Are you going to do any beaver work? You think the conibear you put in the water is going to be doing its own work? Or you think if you have the conibear low enough in the water is going to finish him off? How about a slide wire set with a foothold? So there's differences out there, right? So how about something like dimethyl ketone when you're injecting it into a skunk's thoracic cavity? It's not euthanasia. Is it a humane dispatch? If it's legal in your state? I think it's humane dispatch. Why do we need this term? Because we have a growing movement. Remember that animal rights protest industry I was telling you about? They're trying to eliminate more and more ways for us to kill animals, depending on what state you're in. And if they eliminate different ways to kill animals, can you imagine having to bring every raccoon to a veterinarian in order to get it injected? You have time for that? What's that going to do to your business? Let me give an illustration. In Massachusetts, it's against the law to relocate it's against the law to translocate any wildlife. What that means is if you capture an animal on someone's property, the only place you can release it is on that person's property. Once you leave that person's property, you have to kill it or deposit it with a qualified animal rehabber. You don't have a choice. It's the law. So if you're going to have to kill it, where are you going to bring it? If they've eliminated all the other methods, you're going to have to bring it to a vet? You think what's that going to do to your business? So sometimes, I'll be frank, people are not thinking as a business people. They're just thinking as service providers. They're not thinking about the future of their industry. This is why language is so important. So when you talk about humane dispatch, we want to have other tools because not everyone lives in downtown New York City. Some of us live in states where you have a little bit of space left. And we don't want to have, it's not necessarily more humane to have an animal in a cage trap when we could use a conibear trap and at least have it dead relatively quickly without it being in a cage trap in freezing weather. These issues are complex. They're complicated. I want you to think about the language that you're using as a professional. And I know there's sort of an anti-intellectualism that's infected our industry at times, where guys are more, but we need to have standardized language industry-wide. We're too small. We have got to do better at this. Because if we don't advocate for our own industry, don't be shocked if we go the way of California and ban stuff that's going to dramatically change the structure of your business. When Question 1 passed in Massachusetts, I lost my ability to control moles. It became more difficult for me to deal with raccoons if we had any left after the rabies epidemic, of course. It dramatically changed the structure of my business. And it just took a lot of the wind out of me. And it can happen like that. But if we're not advocating for ourselves, what are we going to do? So start thinking about the language that you're using. Are you using live trap instead of cage or box trap? Are you using euthanasia improperly when you really mean humane dispatch? Are you using the word babies rather than pups or cubs or young? Are you using snare when you really mean cable restraint? Foothold or leg hold. It's not a leg hold. We don't want to catch the animal on the leg. We want to catch the animal on the foot. Catching the animal here is bad because you could break the bones. You want to catch it on the fleshy part of the foot. Foothold. Because the person who controls the language controls the debate. Remember that abortion issue. Is it pro-life or is it anti-abortion? You say, Stephen, it means the same thing. No, in terms of if you're arguing against someone who's pro-life, what position are you in? If you're in favor of abortion and you're arguing with someone who's pro-life, what have you automatically put yourself into? You're now pro-death? And again, this isn't an argument about abortion at this point. I want you to feel the difference in how these terms are used. This is what happens when we use the word live trap when we really mean cage trap. When we're using snare when we mean cable restraint. When we say euthanasia when we really meant humane dispatch. Watch your language. Because if we can start getting our act together and using language correctly, we will find greater success in people listening to our arguments. But we have to believe it. I'm Stephen Vantassel, Wildlife Control Consultant. Another episode of Living the Wildlife. Definitely drop me a line. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us how we're doing. Check us out on Facebook and, of course, YouTube. And I'd love to hear from you. That's at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Hope we're going to see you soon. And I've got a training webinar coming up through my job with the state. Just give a little shout out for that. That's going to be December 10th. I'm working with Ashley Freeman of Bell Labs, and we're going to have a 3-hour training on rodent control for commensal rodents and structures. So it's not going to be dealing with rats. We're just focusing on mice and Peromyscus. So that'll be our training. If you want it, it's no cost. We do have our credits for Montana. We're going to get them for Wyoming, and I believe we're going to have them for Idaho, but it's no cost. So even if you don't care about the credits and just want to check out a training and drop off because you don't have to worry about the credits, definitely sign up. We'd love to have you. And again, that's going to be December 10th, Thursday from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. You can reach out to me at the state of Montana if you want more information, or go to the Montana Department of Agriculture website. Watch your language. Think about what I've said. Try to implement and practice. And don't forget, we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.